Can you see it? Okay, so in our text in the Revel, they have this really teeny little application where we're going to have a couple of buttons, and then we're going to do the event handlers. So let's create that. Now this is going to be a new project for us. So let's click next. And in our new project, we want to call this thing listing 15 underscore one, excuse me. And I want to create my main class, but I'm going to name it something different. I want it to be handle event. I've lost some letters out of my name. Listing 15.1.
Your main class changed itself.
Do I?
When you did that, your main class changed itself back.
Oh, did it? Oh, well. I'll fix it. Let's rename it. I want it to be handle event. And of course, it's no big deal. And I made it Hanadle. See if I can get it all messed up. Okay. So now that should be a little bit better of a name. Now, this thing is going to do, first of all, a bunch of imports. So after this one, we'll start doing some copying. But for this one, let's put them all in by hand again to kind of remind ourselves what all we have. We know we're always using that application.application. And I've got something all messed up already. I can't type today, just have you guys do it. Better. All right, next JavaFX, and we're going to try this geometry.pos for position. And remember, that's the one that's going to make itself disappear when we try to use it. JavaFX.scene.scene. And JavaFX scene.control.button. My goodness. Scene.layout.hbox. Stage.stage. And for our first time, JavaFX.event.actionEvent and JavaFX.event.eventHandler. Gotta have the L in there. Okay, so that should be all of our imports. So we see that for our action event class, to create that, we need that action event library. And to specify that it's a data type of event handler, we have to pull in the event handler library also. Okay, so in our class handle event, we're going to be extending our application class. Now, while we do all this, I want you to be thinking, so far, we've always been extending the application, but remember that you could take one of these objects that you create, like say last time we created that pane that had those 3 flags in it. We could make that a class that extends the Pane object. And then we could just call it anytime we wanted to create a pane in that format. So remember, we could do this inheritance with these GUI objects also. So if we got one all set, we could create a class from it and then inherit that. They don't really show us any good examples, so try to come up with one. I don't have it yet, but just be thinking about that. Now, because our class is extending the application interface, we need to override that start method, uppercase O. And remember, our start always gets a stage passed to it. And we'll call it our primary stage. Now we're going to use an HBox again as our pane, like that flag one did last time. Within our HBox pane, we're going to set our alignment, which we hadn't really done before, to say that we want things to be positioned in the center. And you can experiment with things and see how that affects the things that you add to your HBox. But now that we've got that set, what our business is really today is we want to create this button. We're going to create a button named BT OK. And we're going to say this is a new button, and it's going to display the text OK. We're going to create another button, BT Cancel, and it's going to be a new button, and its text is going to say Cancel. Now, before we can do anything with those buttons, we're going to have to set up these action events. We're going to do that and come back and fix these. But let's go ahead and do our pane.getChildren. And we're going to do add all to add our OK button, BT OK, and our cancel button, BT Cancel, to our HBox pane. Then finally, we can just create our scene and do all that normal stuff. So scene is a new scene using our pane. Our primary stage, will set our title to be something like handle event. Going to do set scene to be our scene. And finally, we can show our stage. I'm going to go ahead and put my launch statement in my main. And then I'm going to run this thing so that we can see our buttons. Now, we don't have any action events set up on these buttons yet, but it's still a good spot to test. So I'm just going to right-click here in my code and choose Run File. And there's my little teeny, if you can see them, my little teeny OK and Cancel buttons. They're right in the middle. And of course, our HBox is no bigger than it needs to be, because it has those. All right, everybody got buttons? Buttons, buttons. Okay, there you go. Button with you there. Can you see where you need? So whenever I create classes in Java, do I just put them all in the same file, Or are they supposed to be in separate .java files, or does it not matter?
Standard is separate.
Separate?
The standard is separate.
The standard is separate. Now, totally separate is best. Because then we don't have hidden classes like buried down in this file somewhere that we can't find. Everything's self-documenting. We know exactly what we've got. We do want a separate .java file for every class, except for our action event classes. So they're going to be kind of buried within our class. And of course, you've seen with Java, you can do it however you like. But the best way is to have each class in its own .java file. Well, I just told you we're going to violate that. We're going to come to the end of our class. So I'm going to label that closing curly braces, because that's the end of my original class, right? That's the end of my handle event class. So now I'm going to create a new class after that. My new class is going to be my event handler. So I'm going to have a couple of them. I'm going to have my OK handler class, and it's going to implement the event handler using a data type of action event. So basically in that class statement, the only thing I can change is that class name. Everything else on that line for an action event has to stay exactly the way it is. So we don't have any options with this other stuff, just our class name. So now when I create this handler class, it's giving me an error because it says you did not override the handle method. Remember when we were looking at that presentation, I said we have to override the handle method. So let's put in that override. That handle method does not return anything. It's a void method named handle, but it does expect to be passed an action event. We're going to call that action event object E within our handle event. Now that action event is going to have some different information for us depending on what kind of action occurred. So in our action event object, we might get like what the name of the button was that they clicked. We might get what the letter was they typed if they typed in a text box. So whatever that action event holds is going to kind of depend on what kind of action event occurred, right? It's going to be bundled up all of the information we need to know about that action that happened. Now within our handle event for our OK button, we're just going to print out a message that says the OK button was clicked. So that's our whole action. So if you want to label these closing ones, we don't usually do that a lot in our advanced class, but when we start getting into these handler events, I think it's a really good idea. So this is going to be my end of the OK handler class. So now I have two classes within this file. I'm going to add a third. My third class is going to be my cancel handler class. Just like our previous action event, it has to have the same exact code for the rest of the line. It's handling an action event. And then it needs to override that handle method. Again, it's going to have this action event data passed to it. You can see in these methods, we're just doing really basic stuff. We're not doing any major work. But we could probably write one handler class that would take care of both of these buttons. And we could have some sort of if statement in there to check to see which button was actually clicked. So depending on how our application is going to work, we can make each event handler as simple as possible, or we could complicate things to have fewer event handlers. It's just kind of how we want to handle it. Now, when somebody clicks our cancel button, let's go ahead and make it print out cancel button clicked. I'll label those ending, closing curly braces again, end of our handle event, and the end of our cancel handler class. So now that I've got these classes created, I can consume them or use them, put them in my code. So I need them up in my start method. So right here, wherever we've created our buttons, let's go ahead and associate our buttons with these action handlers. So on our OK button, first, we're going to set up our OK handler class instance. We're going to call it handle OK. So think about what we did. First of all, we created this class down further with that required method and the code that's going to run. Now we're creating an instance of that class called handle OK. All right, so now our event handler has been instantiated in memory. It's sitting out there saying, what do you want me to do? Well, I want you to listen to the OK button. And I'm going to tell it to do that by using the set on action method in our OK button. And what we want to set on action is our handle OK. So define the handler, instantiate it, associate it with the button. Now, for our cancel, we did the same thing. So for our cancel, we're going to instantiate an instance of our cancel handler class. I'll call it handler cancel. Oops, handle, since that's what I did the button. Okay. So I've created my instance of my handler class, and then I'm going to update my cancel button to say that your set on action watcher is the handle cancel. Now, just like we saw last week, we had to declare the button first, but the other two things could happen in other places. So they don't have to happen in sequence like this. They could even happen after we'd added the buttons to our pane. We're still updating the characteristics of the button with those properties, so we can still add an event handler to it as long as it hasn't been displayed. Now let's see if that works. We see our messages. There's my little OK button clicked message when I click my OK button. And then I should see my cancel button clicked message when I click my cancel button. Everybody's working okay? Now we have a lot we have to do for those handlers, don't we? So that's why in that previous chapter, they didn't show you about these at all. They were like, oh, look, you can make all these cool pictures and stuff. Because the event handlers could be a little complicated. Now, Java is open source, right? And so that means that people submit updates and code improvements and requests and things like that to Java. So I'm going to go back to that presentation and talk about one of those where somebody was like, this is dumb. I hate the way these event handlers work. I want them to work differently. So this first example we looked at is an event handler class, right? A named event handler class. So that's the old Java, 5 years old for JavaFX, but the original. Now, if you look at this presentation, you'll see a little bit more about creating the instance of the handler class and associating it as a listener on your object. Cool, this is messy. Let's take a look at it. The handler object that you created then must be an instance of the corresponding event handler interface, that class that we created. The handler object must be registered by the source object, and it's the action event. So we did all of those things. We know what's going on. Now this picture shows just a little bit different of a view. First of all, we have our handler class. Then we have an instance of that handler class that we've named, and then we associate that with our node or our button. So we can actually kind of see how those pieces are related to each other. Okay, so what about we don't like that? We can actually create a handler class as an inner class. Now an inner class in Java is one that's embedded within our code. So that way we don't have to feel bad about not putting it in its own Java file. So an inner class is a secure thing too. This is a really important point. Remember this for the interview with O'Reilly's. Why is an inner class secure? It's not available to any other code anywhere. So nobody can just call that class or call a method in that class. It's confined within the class that it's defined in, and it can't be accessed anyplace else. So as we look at this, be thinking about how secure it is, because remember, when we just do a small application, it's hard to remember those kinds of things in the total overall world. But the guys that were interviewing at O'Reilly's last week were definitely getting those kinds of questions about inner classes. Now, we can't really make a class private like these handler classes, right? Because we wouldn't be able to call them from someplace else. But we can make the class an inner class, and it can be private. An inner class is super useful for defining handler things, because handler classes are usually pretty specific to the application we're working with. We don't normally share those a lot. The code doesn't change itself, but the class is defined within the outer class instead of having its own class statement outside of the class. Now, whenever we compile this, an important point here, this will end up being compiled with a weird name. So normally if I compile something, I'm going to see the class name, and that's going to make that class be available to others, security-wise. When we compile an inner class, it's actually going to have a different name where it has the outer class name that it's within, followed by a $sign, followed by the inner class name. So again, it's more secure. It's not just available out there for people to see. Okay, so event handlers are normally only used by one class. We can move them in and become an inner class. So let's look at a circle. And we'll see this inner class and get some different code. Because we all just want all the code. So let's go to NetBeans. In this one, they have it in a couple of places. We're just going to try to do one. So it's actually out here in the chapter twice, this little circle one, where they do it once to show you how to draw a circle without any buttons, and then add some buttons. We'll just skip ahead and do the one with the buttons. So let's create a new project. And this one is going to be listing. 15_2. And what I want my main class to be, if I can do it right, is control circle hang on, without event handling. But I want to do this other one just a second. I'm on the wrong one. Sorry, I've just gone everywhere, got it all messed up. So let's name it like they want, control circle without event handling. I want to go back to the one that we just created, 15.1, and let's grab all of those import statements. Now I'm going to check and see. I'm sure we needed a few different ones. Application, POS, scene, control.button. Okay, after your control.button, they don't have to be in this order, but just to make sure we have them all. After the button, we want JavaFX.scene.layout.stackPane. We keep our H box. And in addition to our H box, after that, we want to add a border pane. Use a little bit of everything in this one. One more, JavaFX.scene.paint.color. And dot circle. Oh, it's shape dot circle, not paint. I'm going to leave the action event and event handlers in there, even though we might not need them quite yet. I want my control circle without event handler really long named class to extend application. And then we'll put in our override. Now the first thing we're going to allocate is a stack pane, and we're going to name this pane we're going to create a circle called circle. Now in our circle we'll do that set stroke to set our color, and they set it to black. You can set it whatever you like. And our fill. Now we're going to go ahead and add our pane. Or circle to our pane, sorry. Now we're going to create an H box to hold our buttons. And what we want button-wise is we're going to have one button that says enlarge and one button that says shrink. So we got our stack pane set up with our circle. Now we're going to create an H box to hold those buttons. We'll set up the spacing. And again, we'll do our set alignment. Be in the center. We want BT enlarge. Be our button that says to enlarge. And BT shrink. Now for our HBox, they actually have two get children commands. And the first one, we're going to add our enlarge button. And then we're going to add our shrink button. Try it. I didn't. It does. Let me see if I can use it. It took it to spine. So, oh, wait. If I spell things properly. I'll leave mine as one statement, and I don't think it should impact the way it builds those nodes in that H box. And I don't know if Java programmers just get used to doing things one at a time, and so they just keep doing it that way. That get children all might be new or something. Hard to say. Okay, so now we've got one pane built with our circle. We've got an H box built with our shrink and enlarge buttons. So we have them kind of separated a little bit. Now we're going to add a border pane. On our border pane, we're going to set the center up, oh, excuse me, object to be our pane, which will be our stack pane. So remember, a border pane sets up things on the border. It's like Taco Bell, right? And so we can put things at the bottom or the left or the right or the top. And so for this border pane, we're going to go ahead and set our H box to be at the bottom. Now this is kind of a weird one. If you notice, we've got our object type of border pane, our class name, and then we gave it our instance name. We use our instance name to set the center object and set the bottom. But then to set the alignment, we have to go back to the border pane object type itself. So try that, try some different things. I don't know if that's just the programmers that created that type of object, that in some cases the attribute can't be set on an instance. It has to be set at the class level, but it can be a little bit misleading sometimes. But I'll just go ahead and say, okay, that's how they want it. I'm going to do it that way. So I'm going to add my H box. Is the center of the bottom is what we're doing there basically. So we said the H box goes to the bottom of the border pane, and then in our set alignment, we're saying the H box is actually in the center of that bottom part. So fiddle with things because you have a lot of different options, properties that you can set. Okay, we should have all of our objects now on the screen. So let's build our scene. And it's going to be comprised of our border pane. That's our main parent object. We're going to set our primary stage's title to say control circle. Type in there. Set our scene to be our scene. And show that thing. Okay. Set up your main to launch. And see what you get. We haven't added our action events yet. So just make sure everything displays properly. That looks pretty good. So here's our circle. We have our enlarge button and our shrink button. So notice how whenever you're looking at it, you can't really tell that you have, you know, this type of pane and then the H box and all of that, because it just looks like you've got one complete GUI form created, right? So it really shows you a little bit how you can put all these pieces together. Is everybody's working okay to display? Sure. 22, uh-huh. See if you get some circles. Those shouldn't cause errors. Those are just warnings. So scroll down. There must be some others somewhere.
Right up here.
So add all.
Yeah, that's what you got all. The top one's missing the circle. You've got an extra character at the end of that one, right? So Session1 would be. Right, that's small font, so far away. Right there. Scroll up 62. That's the first thing I do. Seeing at the front. Sorry. Scroll up. Stop. On the next one.
Where's your curve? one, and then we'll send you off. Is it broken still?
All I
These guys come up here.
get is that. Because that number's wrong.
This statement is missing that adds the scene to your stage. So. Let's see.
I got it.
Okay, let's make these buttons do something. Now, for this one, we're going to be, let me make sure where I am. We're going to be using the inner class. So let's go to where we have our buttons created. I'm going to look first at which button do I want? I think I want button enlarge since I have it defined first. Now when I create that enlarge button, I put the text on it and I add it to my H box. Well, I can go ahead and do our event handler stuff after that. So let's do it. Create and register the handler. So we're going to say for BT enlarge, our set on action is going to be a new instance of an event handler called enlarge handler. Now, if I look, I'm going to see that I have an error on that because I haven't created that enlarge handler. Let's create it. I'm going to go down to, me in the right place here, the end of my start method. So I'm still inside my class, and I'm just kind of in the same place I would be if I was going to create a new method. And right here, I'm going to create this class, enlarge handler. It implements the event handler, and it uses an action event. Now in my class, I still need to override that handle method. And our handle event expects that action event parameter to be passed to it. We're going to call it E. And we're going to actually run another method here whenever somebody clicks on that button. We're going to run a method to enlarge that circle. A typo here. Now, I don't really have an instance of that, so I've got to get to work on some things. Let me go up to the top of my class, and let's create an instance. Now, I'm going to see if I have something wrong because I'm trying to use one example instead of both examples. Whenever we create our class here, control circle without event handling, and we extend our application, let's create a class level variable. So just like any other class that we create, if we put a variable up at the very top or outside of any method, that's going to be a class level variable. We want this variable to be called control circle without event handling. So if you notice, I'm making it the same as our class name. And then I'm going to call it circle pane. Oh, there it is. Let's just make this shorter. I'm going to name this circle pane too. You can shoot me. We'll just call it private circle pane. We're going to say this is a circle pane, and we want it to be a new instance of a circle pane. Now again, this needs to be created in our code. So I could go through and create an outline, and that would probably work a lot better, right? Because I'm getting kind of messy here. I want to create this, oh, but I need that. So let's do it. I'm going to go down to the bottom, and I've already got my new class created for my enlarge handler. Let's put a comment on that. We'll say this class handles events for our enlarge button. It is an inner class. So the only way we can get to this class is from within the class that we've put it in. Okay? It's inner. Now we're going to create another outer class so that we can get all this stuff working together. So my enlarge handler, I'm going to leave just like it is. I'm going to come down past my main, and I'm going to label this closing curly brace, end of class. Because I'm going to create a new class, that circle pane class. Now, this is going to give us an example of one that extends an existing object. It extends the stack pane. Now, our circle pane class is going to be more of a standard class like what we've seen in the past. So first of all, we're going to have a class level field, which is going to be a circle. We're going to build a constructor for this class. And in our constructor, we're going to do the getChildren.add, and we're going to add, that circle object that we created as a class level field. You'll notice that we're going to do the things that we did for our circle in our start method. We're going to do that in our constructor instead. Let's set our color to black. Let's set our fill to white. Now, our circle pane is going to be the class that knows how to shrink and enlarge our circle object. So it's going to contain these methods to enlarge and shrink. So let's create a method. Enlarge. So if somebody calls this method, we just want to increase the size of our radius, right? So we can actually do it pretty easily. We'll do it by getting the current radius and then adding 2 to it. What do you think we want to do for our shrink? Same thing. Now in this one, since we're shrinking down, we're going to say if our circle dot get radius is greater than 2, we're going to use one of those ternary if statements, you know, then we want to use circle dot get radius minus 2. Otherwise, we just want to keep it at whatever size it is right now because it's too small for us to shrink anymore.
What did you say the question mark means?
So it's a ternary if. Let me point at it here. So whenever we're doing a ternary if, we have our condition here. Get radius, if get radius is greater than 2, the question mark delimits what should happen if that condition is true. We'll subtract 2. Then the colon says this is what should happen if that condition is false. Okay. So it's kind of like a one-line if statement all in there together. Practice your job code besides just making GUIs work. All right, so we should have this class pretty well built. We've got our constructor. We have just a couple of methods. We don't have a lot going on here. No setters and getters, all that stuff we don't need. I'm going to go ahead and label this closing curly brace end of circle pane class. So now we created this great constructor here that builds this circle and sets the stroke and the fill the way we were doing it earlier in our start method. So we don't really need to build that circle in our start method anymore, do we? Let's take a look at what we've got. What we've got up here is we're saying that whenever our class begins, we're going to create a class level data element called circle pane that's going to be an instance of that circle pane object. So as soon as our program starts, whatever starts, it's going to create this circle pane. That circle pane is going to have all those characteristics we set in the constructor. So now when we come into our start method, this circle pane is already going to exist, right? And it's already going to be built with those things that we wanted for our circle. So we can take out some of our code for building the circle. Let's see if I can do it, right? So let's see. When we start out, we don't need our circle stuff right there. Let's comment that out. So instead now, when we use our start method, we're going to start out creating our HBox and setting it all up with our buttons, getting our buttons in there. Then we're going to say that our enlarge button uses that event handler, enlarge handler that we've created. We've got our border pane. What pane do we want to use here for this one that's in error? Circle pane, because that's our new one. Perfect. So it has an uppercase P. Now everything else should be pretty much the same. We shouldn't see any major problems here. We've got our inner class here that says our enlarge handler is going to run our circle pane.enlarge method. So let's see if it works. Why doesn't shrink work? We didn't do a darn thing for shrink. So what should we do? How can we make shrink work? So let's see what all we need. If we go down to the very bottom, we've got our shrink method in our circle pane class, right? So we don't need to do anything there. But my handler, I only have an enlarge handler. So let's create a shrink handler. Shrink handler. And it's going to implement our event handler. Now for this one, I'm just going to make it exactly the same, except that it's going to run action event. It's going to run the other method. Circle pane.shrink. Do you see it? Oh, thank you. Couldn't see that C. Now we do need to do another thing though, right? Because now that we have this event handler, we need to associate it with that button. So here we've created our association for our enlarge button. We need to do the same thing for our shrink button. New shrink handler. Can't type shrink or circle or anything. Now you should be able to shrink and enlarge. Now when you shrink, remember you should hit that point where it just doesn't shrink anymore because it's just too small. Now we didn't put any code like that in our enlarge. There it is, it's the little dot, it just stays there. So our enlarge will just keep going outside the bounds of the window.
It pushes the buttons away.
Is it smush them out of its way?
It will.
I wanted to see what it would do. Oh, look at it, push them. It's so bossy. It's just like, nope, that's my spot. So then we don't worry because nobody can click that button anymore anyways because it's all hidden. Okay, so that is two types of event handlers. You saw the handler class and then the inner class of a handler. Now there are two more types that we'll look at next time where we can do an anonymous inner handler and then we can use some great stuff that you'll love. We'll look at those next time, but I want you guys to have some time for lab time because we haven't had much. So this is going to be really unstructured lab time to let you work on the projects that are due. We do have 2 assignments due this week on Tuesday because you know I just love grading so much. Actually, it's because the GUI ones go pretty quick. So let me know if you have any questions. You should have enough knowledge to start on the first one if you're there. But otherwise, you might still be working on the one that's due tonight. So I'm going to just let me know if you have any questions.
think I said that.
So we don't have class next Tuesday, right?
Yeah, you guys, no school Monday or Tuesday next week.
You put our time.
Monday? Oh, yeah, I'll have to, when do you want them due?
26.
No.
Nice try.
Yeah, great try. 20th or 17th. Those are your choices. Well, the 20th, you don't like the 17th? I'm pushing for Sunday night on everything, but then you guys start emailing me and I won't. 20th will be our assignment due date next week.
For which?
For all of it, for both of them, since we don't have class on Tuesday.
You have to go all the way down to where it's just a little dot.
If radius is great.
Oh,
Yeah,
It's little,
because we started out large.
Oh, they're all uploading. It's gonna be those.
So I think
I get your new one, sorry.
Just like this
No, I want to.
Oh, so this one? Yeah.
And then that way I
This
can.
is not very
open it and let you start
Okay.
having to do a bunch of work
Gotcha.
on my end. So, yeah, when you guys start having 5 classes and forms and stuff, it gets really hard to do your projects. Let's do that one day. You know what you need for that?
I just.
I tried to do it the other day.
Oh.
There I go. I said that, I got sick of them.
That's what it was.
I was around from Memphis.
Static is what makes it do that.
I went through this last night. We were talking about chat. I was going through the exercises. I had the same exact problem.
They do that.
I didn't cut the right. But, you know, it's working, but it's not the way.
Shared by all.
My high school studied.
So I think you need your board or the static too. I was off with all the signals and stuff, which is really static. I was looking off with all the other things.
What I'm unclear about is, because I know you can read your slides, I don't know already. But can I do that assignment for my
Sure.
without a picker, but then like still work on a different game?
Oh, yeah.
So that number gets bigger.
Awesome.
Yeah, yeah,
I
that's
didn't
fine.
want to
No,
like,
I
that one for
understand.
my like semester project type thing.
No, just for this one,
Okay,
yeah.
sure.
So actually.
I think it doesn't have to get small. Unless you
Are you
don't
doing
set
your
the.
ugly tree? You man, that makes me have nightmares. Okay, growing like levels. That's what one of the that's not what I did last semester. That is the one reason.
See, I wonder if you can bring it back with the strings. Is it plus the
That's what I was doing. Yeah. Are they saying
I was gonna write out in my head.
you see if I'm just not clicking on a branch or something, because that's possible. I could just have not seen them. When I go into grading marathons, I'm like, V, I'm done, I'm done. You can't see it, yay.
See, whenever my stuff was at the top,
See,
then it would have been
I would
easier
still
to
wait
pick.
until the end. I would still be like, oh, I'm almost done.
As far as the pictures of the code and stuff, just send multiple smaller images? That way the text is easier to read?
Sure, however you think works well. So I just want you to try to make it to where it makes you look good if somebody were to look at your repo.
Okay.
Because that's our big thing here, is getting you to look good. Because I'm just like,
So here's the programs. The in-class is what we do in
but
class.
see, they're
And then
not
there's
there.
the GUI ID,
Right,
which is
so I don't have your calendar and your second.
the calendar is in the
Is it
in-class.
in
I'd
there?
have to transfer it over. The random IO, and then the GUI ID, which is that.
Oh, they're out there. So if you could,
I had to transfer over the
if you
calendar
would,
back.
just go back to that assignment and just paste that link in there for me and submit it again so I can
Okay.
find it. I'll just click on that link then and I'll be able to find your code for it because you've
Okay.
got it out there. But if you would just go ahead and submit that link for these varied ones, then I'll be able to
Oh.
find them. And I
Okay, 'cause I've
understand
been
that
setting
happens with the repos.
repository link. I
Mhm.
didn't worry about the HTML link because it said attach the repository link. So I
Right.
made sure to
Since these ones are buried down in there, just go ahead and attach that.
I tend to do the tree. But as far
That's
as
fine.
the ones that we do in class, I put in the in class because that's
Yeah, I
just my
think
norm.
you've got all.
And then as
I think
far
I
as
can
the,
find your new ones.
regular programs, I have the regular folder.
Yeah, I
and
didn't have
then
any trouble
clicking on-
finding those ones. So
Okay.
perfect.
And then those
Just
are
those
the
old
main
ones.
folders. Then that's
Mhm.
where the files are.
Perfect.
The source is buried in.
That would be
tab.
great.
Okay.
Yeah, just
So,
send me a link to those others that I
Get
couldn't
the
find.
HTML link, not the repository.
Mhm. Yep,
Okay.
yep. That'll work. And then we'll find them. Get you
Alright.
graded. Get some stuff
Yeah, I
out there
noticed
for
I got
you.
a message or two, and it's like, wait a second, because I didn't get to check them till Monday. And so it's like,
Are
wait
you
a second.
computerless?
No, I was computerless because I was in Drill, Kansas,
Oh.
and I brought my computer, but not the charger. One thing I
No.
forgot, so I couldn't get done with any of my homework in Monday.
No problem. I didn't go back and regrade them anyway. So you just submit those and I will get to them and see what you have. Thank you, sir. What's it doing to you?
I can get it to where it gives me this message. Either merge or rebase.
Merge works for me.
Oh, never mind. Try merge. That gives me this. So what? I can't like stay organized. I've gotten to where I have to do the drag and drop at home to put them in there because it doesn't otherwise do. Yeah, it's the stuff that I did at home. That's on my flash drive.
So let's say rebase them. Let's try that.
Will it matter if I do it from one of these or from this one? I was trying to do a pull to get everything synced up. Try rebase.
I mean, if you go, this is.
Okay.
So you should be able to click on the link. But you can sign up for it. You get a free account.
Oh, you can?
And then they have.
I should just be able to ignore that. I don't think you're getting more.
Yeah, I got the one.
I went to the tutoring center yesterday to make sure to work on stuff.
Yeah.
Or the library. Not the library, tutoring.
Yeah.
But I had a problem with Word and something with Microsoft. I was just trying to
I think we need to
make one of those data.
try merge.
lines with two arrows.
Yeah.
And like,
In
don't have a
Word.
program.
So if you
It's like, I have to get to be like a program.
do that again.
So I had to work something in Word.
Yeah, exactly. So you're trying to get arrows?
I got it. I was actually using it.
You can go to shapes. Oh,
I needed the two sided because you have to write.
oh. Well, try doing that at Word.
Oh. So
See,
my
whenever
game
it's a
design
review, it
class,
just
I took
helps
last
us
year,
get
straight
more. Let's do it.
programming. I think one assignment where you have to make those charts.
It just got rid of that.
Some data flow,
Mhm.
and I've used it for Word and
Okay, good. And it's putting stuff back. That's really
my computer insert one thing into the page
Mhm.
before or after it.
Yeah.
You're like, I spent forever. What is that? It's like aligning.
Yeah.
Text years. Yeah, we never really like that.
Yeah, just for whatever.
Takes
But
forever.
there's the option, you know, you just like
Doing the drag and drop at home.
Okay.
Up here and then the.
I've used it a long time ago.
I can kind of show you like what.
couldn't get it to sync up like that.
Well, if you're just dragging and dropping, just drag and drop here, there too. Yeah, whatever is working for you, that's fine. Because I don't think it's causing any trouble.
For the last two, we didn't have the problem.
I think everything's fine either way. That's a lot easier way to do it. I finally figured out why I can't have this way. I do that. See, with Unity, our projects are too big to do that. You have to do the get commands that also won't things out there. Can't get them and put them out there because they're too big. So I guess that's why I've always gotten stuck that way.
I have a question on this. Now, where are we getting this image?
You're making it
Anywhere?
No, you're
Okay,
trying it
and then is
yourself.
this signify a grid pane?
No, it's just showing you about how big that car is, since you're going to have to create that image yourself.
Creating an image and making
Okay.
Yeah, you're just superhuman.
So basically go off the hangman.
So, really good thing to do would be to, just like we just did where we created a new class that extended the pane. We put the circle in there. It would be a great idea to create a new class that extends the pane. You put your car in there so that then you could just move the pane. In your
Like with the
animation.
handlers?
Like what?
With the handlers.
Yes, with the handlers, because you could make the handlers be somebody pressing the arrow keys instead of the buttons.
So I've kind of went through the chapter a little bit.
Oh, good.
So
He's way ahead.
I got
That was so good. I'm gonna have to take that darn class.
So I think if I
The Unity class.
I haven't messed with that. But there's like so much content. I'm still on like, I'm getting to abstract classes.
Are you?
But that's the
so basically if I watch this, then I'll be able to do the car thing.
You should be able to, because he's doing the running fan in that one, so he's doing an animation.
Okay.
Our animation's gonna be a lot easier because you're just going left or right, where his is a little bit more involved. But yes,
Okay.
it should get you started.
And can I still show you the?
Sure, yeah.
I'll have to pull it up.
You want to do it my way?
Really? I'll do it your way.
the person who has to do stuff.
You know how stubborn I am. But once I get away, I need to do it my way because I want to solve
That's how
my
I am.
problems.
I do it my way, I can't think.
It's true.
But you can say that.
Okay, let me. I have to put it back where it was. That's fine.
You're doing a racing game with that. Oh, you're talking about. The one that now oh, wasn't it?
Okay, now let me get this. I'm just going to take it out.
The thing was, I didn't know.
I didn't want to interrupt him. Yeah, I know.
Oh, he gave you mine?
Well, he told me he could.
Didn't even know
Yeah,
that.
he described it to a T, and I was almost like, yeah, I know it. I did not just listen to him go on.
Oh, yeah. Because it's built up.
Doesn't make it go any faster.
Well, it's something you understand. So I didn't like I don't think we had.
You're not old enough to watch that.
Yeah, we got to think of learning more.
I mean, I'm just kidding. Okay, so let me.
That's not really
Yeah,
good.
we don't see
so bad last week.
It's a guy's job. Well, I made a mistake 3 years ago. I had
Stupid. Last year, January.
yeah.
It's crazy.
You're making me, you're saying, I am so self-centered. I'm using this as an excuse because people are screwed up. Just saying. I don't know. I'm gonna go.
We'll get some rest, sir.
So I'm back to where I was with that line message. So I tried to implement the primaries. Look at you, it's got it down hardly enough. No, it's good. I got all these comments. So.
I was thinking about that earlier. If you try, you set it here.
Yeah.
Try doing the set and read up here, and you might not need this one, and just the one after. You need to do a set and
Yeah.
read of your control variable.
Yeah.
Before you go to loop, and then you need one after.
I was set here, Gen 1.
But you don't want to set it that way.
I don't.
You know.
Okay.
You want to set it the same way you're setting it before. That way it's all based off of their
The last thing
input.
you want to do is get behind.
Okay, so I want to get rid of this? I don't follow you.
I would try taking those sections and putting them in this right here.
Okay. These on. Here to make it where I can look at it.
Right. No, put below- it needed to be below.
Two things. So,
Yeah, you got to declare it.
so
I lost it.
Yeah, it went right over.
Now, what I have is one.
You can put it as 0. It really doesn't matter as long as you don't have it as negative.
That's all right.
Now try running it.
It should be fine.
Okay, we're still entering it.
All you need to think about
So
is
that didn't fix our
what
input.
set of truly races is your variable. So if it was declared the parent set, you can get to.
Okay.
If it was declared within here, yeah, in your while, then you will be
So it's, got it.
So it's always where it's declared. Look at your code.
So just take that value and send down.
So you're fine, because that variable is throughout that whole group. So anything you do in there. will be able to see it.
And then this really was, we did the CIS, like, Microsoft test yesterday.
Uh-huh.
And she
Oh,
said,
that's before we did the why not.
I took it all out.
Okay, gotcha, gotcha.
Email it to
Went
me.
back to where it was, gotcha.
yeah, I can do it.
I need to do some review.
Yes,
Make sure I
you,
can speak.
that is very important.
Yes, it is.
You look very nice.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm ready. Did you
That's
fix it? No.
No, that didn't work.
Paige, you were on it.
It put it into an infinite loop.
Well, go back and do it again. 'Cause you're right. I want to do that. Okay. And then what else?
That put it in the infinite loop.
Yeah. Okay, so go to the bottom. And after,
At that same code.
yeah,
Under
so
here.
it's after the dot, dot, dot.
Oh,
Now you will.
And now run it.
It's hard to tell.
So, wait,
Okay.
does that mean the cache is going down?
Did it again and it kills it
How come I did it twice? Because that reline.
because of the read line.
Which
What
is
is-
supposed to be
yeah.
that way?
Yeah.
Okay, so now I want to go with the letter.
Maybe you do a negative accounts receivable because that would lower what people overdo.
Wait, I tried 5 just to see and then negative 1.
You know what I mean?
Oh my God.
There you go. It's the
Okay.
read before and the
Oh,
read
yeah.
at the end.
It sounds good, but let's see if I can agree with this. Real
I agree
damn,
with mine.
sorry.
Oh my God.
Seems like it might look right, but it's going to be.
Hold my breath.
Just see, this is hypergrade we're talking
I know. Did I
It's
not
still not
end this
about.
thing?
But look, now we're almost there.
This is
Now
how
it's
it
just your
was.
spacing.
That's exactly how it was.
Honestly, I don't think it's the wrong one.